Good evening, everyone. Namaste and welcome to the Albion International. I'm here with these vile right-wingers who support the death penalty. I'm going to be putting forward the arguments against the death penalty, and I want to see the rebuttals that come forward. Obviously, this is a follow-up to our previous conversation regarding Peter Hitchen's essay on the death penalty. Whilst I was in favour of it, I've repented and I've put all of these slides together to try and put some arguments against it. How's everyone doing? So we've got a new guest with us. We've got LF Graves.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me on.
You're more than welcome. I've got iTunes, as always.
Hello, everybody.
Brandig.
Good afternoon from Texas.
And Rupert.
Hello.
So, any preamble, or should we just go on to the slides?
Since I was not on the last time, a quick why I support the death penalty is it is basically a moralizing factor on the population. That is my basic thesis. Mm-hmm. Because, how can I tell you? You have like Daily Mail and other such newspapers, and their bread and butter is like ex-murderer got like off with 1 year in prison or something, and that is, I think, a demoralizing factor on the population. And it's a moralizing factor on the population if these people get harsh justice. That is my basic. It is a postmodern kind of thing, but it's like my thoughts on that. Just really quick.
Yes. And also just a point in the chat. Yes. I have a feeling we're not going to have quite as many viewers tonight as AA has moved his cigar stream onto tonight's slot, but it's still going to be a fun conversation. I'm also drinking Nescafe Gold, so I'm getting in the spirit of stealing his limelight. No, if that's the only introductions that we have, what I've done is lay it out in what have I got? 5 categories. We've got practical responses, civilizational responses, religious responses, moral responses, and legislative responses. I've just any of the statistics, I've put a couple of quotes in there, but mainly I just want to focus on the actual arguments themselves. If there are any statistics in there, obviously I've not looked them up. I've just sort of stolen them from Amnesty International and various other sites. So I'm not going to defend them if they're wrong. It's just to put the ideas forward. So the first category on practical responses. Life without parole is a better alternative. How could you defend the death penalty when we have the option of just putting someone in prison for life?
Well, first of all, if somebody is in prison for life and can't really get executed because of the justice system, or in this case, I guess, the American justice system, it takes forever to get him through death row, I guess. So you have somebody that could do a lot of harm to him and others, guards, whatnot. And, so to speak, you have a loose cannon, which you have to control and could do much more harm than other way.
Well, they've reached the maximum limit of punishment. They've not reached the maximum limit of abuses. So they've hit one limit without hitting the other one. Therefore, there's an infinite opportunity for expansion in chaos.
Out of nowhere, a freelance bishop has appeared, coming in from the sidelines to tag team. Sorry, carry on.
Well, it's common for lifers in prison to take on odd jobs. And by odd jobs, I mean violent contract work for drug cartels and such in prisons. because there's functionally nothing that can be done to them.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the same problem as we discussed before, where you hit the maximum threshold of, or you hit the maximum ceiling of punishment. Therefore, in for a penny, in for a pound at that point. Right.
But so life, even if you're on death row, though, that people would be doing the same thing.
Well, they can't do that. They can't do that anymore if they'll risk dying. If they do that, if they help a drug cartel carry out a hit from inside prison,
mm-hmm.
and that's something that they can be executed for, then that's going to be a strong disincentive for them to go ahead with that. Whereas if all they're going to get is more time in prison, that they were going to be in prison for life anyway, then there is no additional punishment.
But if they're on death row already, then they have no incentive to not carry out that because they already have reached the maximum threshold.
You're absolutely right, which is why speedy punishment is warranted in that case.
Yeah, putting somebody quickly to death is, I guess, the best thing because, yeah, I mean,
yeah. Just on, sorry, I'll let you carry on. I just want to say a lot of the arguments. Obviously, I'm putting these arguments forwards, but a lot of the arguments I found whilst looking at this are procedural, and the only nation they use as an example to criticize it based on procedure is the United States. So they really need to get their act together with some of those arguments.
Yes, I'm familiar with a lot of the conversation on this issue. In regards to that, they use procedural inefficiencies as an excuse to just get rid of it entirely.
Mm-hmm.
But so back on the
I think
points.
Sorry, LF was going to make a point. Sorry.
Of course.
So this point's basic. So it's basically saying it's better to force them to a life of penal labor. That is what I get from this. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Or you just imprison their family as well.
I can get on with that.
North Korean style. So.
Okay, I can get on with that. Yes.
Okay.
Well, the alternative is death penalty by artillery. That's.
Yes,
wasn't that one of King Jong-il's?
I remember that spectacle. Tie him to a post in the middle of a field, and use an artillery barrage against them. Okay, I'll cede that point, but the jury will be less likely to convict if the death penalty is in place, a la 12 Angry Men.
That's not the case, because the sentencing phase of the crime is after the conviction. So first you have to be, at least in America, you have to be determined guilty. And then after having been determined guilty, then you are sentenced. And most crimes have a range of punishments available to them. So while the death penalty is on the table in, I think they're Class A felonies or something of that nature, you don't necessarily automatically get it if convicted.
So it's more like this person is guilty of like child murder or something, and then later the punishment is how does it say? The punishment is conducted later. What he's going to face. First, he's going to get guilty. Then he knows what he's going to face. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's my understanding of the American justice system.
Interesting.
But it being on the table will influence the decision of some jurors because they know it's a possibility.
Well, this sounds like a criticism. This sounds like a criticism of the jury system as much as anything, then, because because if they're going to determine whether or not the person did the crime on the basis of the punishment they might receive, then the entire system's corrupt by that point.
In fact, there's a doctrine of jury nullification, which was used quite frequently in the South against Jim Crow laws and the like, that the jury just knew that the defendant was guilty and chose to render the decision of not guilty because they didn't believe the law was either just or being fairly applied.
Yes, I remember that's being put forward in a what was the channel called? CP Grey video that was put quite succinctly. They brought that up, which I wasn't aware of before.
The inverse can also happen, as we recently seen, where
That's true.
where the jury thinks that the law should be applied, even though, if you look at it technically, it should not be.
And that's where the appeals process is available.
Hold on, though. Do you really think that if the death penalty was more vigorously used, that they would have been more sympathetic and not convicted in this hypothetical case we're talking about?
In this hypothetical case, if the death penalty was available, they probably would have even quicker come to a decision.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is just pointing out more problems with the jury system because we're just acknowledging to a certain extent that it's being used as a tool in factional warfare.
Yeah, I guess every human system has human flaws, and if the people on the jury, I guess, are weak or willing to take a hit, or however you want to call it, you don't really get justice. So that's a jury problem, not a death penalty problem.
So the solution would be just to remove all humans. That's what we're talking about. So
Yeah.
death sentences for everybody.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the point of like this topic. Like we have to deal. The jury system is flawed, and is the death penalty in regards to that still like good? I think that is more the question here.
Well, Christian makes a good point. About the fact that it draws attention and concern that might not necessarily be present in jurors if they realize that this is actually a life or death situation, rather than having the wiggle room of, well, even if I'm wrong, he's still not going to be killed.
You're right. Okay. Yes, let's carry on. It's very hard to defend a position that I'm not in
With which you
agreement
disagree?
Right now. Yes. Moving on. Let's not talk about the Byzantine Empire. It feels like a repeat of this all over again. So let's go on to the deterrent question. Whether or not it actually is a deterrent. Again, I've stolen a couple of lines from various sources, mainly, as I say, Amnesty International and a couple of other websites I found. The general consensus among social scientists is that the deterrent effect of the death penalty is at best unproven. So it's the scientists have spoken.
Well.
Checkmate, atheist.
Do you want to finish your point, or should I interject already?
No, that is as far as I want to finish my point.
Okay, first of all, as you mentioned in a previous stream, the UK government did a paper on this, and the deterrent effect is very hard to establish, since the point, for example, Amnesty International always drives Canada and moderates and the death penalty out to drive this point home. But if you look at the last de jure execution and de facto execution, you get a very different pictures. And on the other hand, before the death penalty was abolished or stopped, before it was kicked out of the law, the rate of which people got executed went down anyway. First of all, then on the second point, social scientists aren't scientists, if you want to call it that are commonly on the right. So if you get a liberal bias in, I guess they're not really for harsh punishment. On the other point, the UN is something on the same. The UN has always spoken itself out against the death penalty, has even some whatever the UN does against the death penalty. So I would, I can poison your well as well, I guess.
What's the quote? Lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Yes.
We could just debate all the statistics and whether or not they're valid and whose statistics are valid, but that's probably not going to get us very far.
I mean, this was on the actual stream. This was the point I was trying to make, that I think when you get into a slogging match with statistics, you could just go on forever and no one's ever going to win.
So I have read up a little bit on that, and what they base this on is basically the difference between the crime rates in like states that have the death penalty and states that don't have the death penalty, and you can't really compare those because of the demographic issues. Let's just say that.
Well, you can't even, to go back to the Canada example, you can't compare Canada to itself from previous era, because Canada has also changed pretty significantly over that time. So
yeah, well, that's at least one point. On the other point is, if you really want to have, you also have a high rate of murder to convicted to death penalty. I guess if the death penalty is the highest sentence for murder. If that rate drops, I suspect the murder rate will shoot up as well. Because if just one in 100 gets convicted to sentenced to the death penalty or gets executed, the deterrent effect isn't really establishing. So you would also need a high rate of death penalty spoken for a high rate of murder. In the most American states, this is not the case. For example, Texas has around 1,500 murders, I guess. I'm not 100% on the numbers, and only about 5 executions. So those numbers don't really add up.
Well, this is actually a criticism that we'll come on to in a couple of slides, that it's essentially a lottery as to whether or not the punishment will be awarded to the criminal in question. So it could be used both ways, as you're saying, that if it's more vigorously enforced, you'll see a more deterring effect. But again, I think what would be good at the end of each of these slides, if we can just take each argument and just give like a yes or no as to whether or not it's any good, because I do feel like, to bolster the, I don't just want to straw man the other side. I do think that it would be good to say, look, these are the points that are not worth bringing up, and I think that a lot of them, as we'll find, are anything to do with the procedure of the execution.
Well, in support of
I want to get to the ones that are actually fundamentally interesting to talk about.
In support of the not deterrent position, there's a reasonable case to be made in that, as currently constituted, the death penalty is not sufficiently deterrent or deterrative. It doesn't actually have any deterring effects because, as was previously mentioned, it's functionally never applied. There's functionally already a ban on the death penalty, so it's not considered within the scope of expected punishment for actions. So consequently, it doesn't have a deterrentative effect.
There was also one that I saw that was so stupid I didn't include it, which was polling data for asking people whether or not they thought the death penalty was a good deterrent. Because polling people on something like that is definitely a good indication of their actual preferences. But what about the argument?
You would say that, but on the other hand, a lot of people are, with polling, you also have to say, just to interject this point really quickly, if you poll people, for example, in Switzerland about the death penalty, in Switzerland, the death penalty wasn't a topic since about 75 years, and people just say, oh yeah, it's normal, we don't have it, and in this barbarous time, we had the death penalty. But the death penalty got abolished from top on high, had nothing to do with popular support or anything to that matter.
Well, this is what I mean. The polling data is pretty pointless because all it does is bolster the popular narrative. You know, you've either got people that are just saying it because it would be uncouth to say otherwise. But whether or not things actually change, they would still have that opinion. I beg to differ. Sorry, there was another point I wanted to make on deterrence, but it slipped my mind. I'll see if it comes back to me. We'll move on to the next one. If it is a deterrent, you're not deterring the person that's committed the crime. You're essentially using them as a scapegoat to punish them more severely than you should, to try and prevent future crimes happening that they have not committed.
You can't say that about any punishment, though. Like not just death penalty.
There are certain punishments that can be restorative,
Yeah, true.
not just purely retributive, which is what the death penalty functionally is.
Yeah, you couldn't
but
say
then
that about fine.
Yeah, sure, but any kind of imprisonment, for example, you can say that about that as well.
Only if the prisoner is not compelled to do labor which produces a profit over and above their incarceration costs, and said profit is returned to the person they wronged.
Well,
is that something that really happens?
Debtor's prison, I think, was an exact case of that, but that was
fair enough.
100 years ago plus.
Well, on this point, wasn't Kamala Harris involved, or the current president of the United States, so to speak? Wasn't she selling the prisoners as a sort of slave labor, something to that effect?
Yes, I believe so. And I think the demographics of the prisons were not representative of the population as a whole. Let's say that, and so that was an argument that was being used against her. But let's not get onto Satan. Let's stick with the death penalty.
So you don't want the stream nuked like almost last time.
So the other point on deterrence. Sorry, going back to something that L.F. Graves said. I didn't include it in the slides, but it's something I wanted to bring up because it's pretty wacky. There are advocates of banning punishment as a whole because they are of the opinion that there is no. Well, it was one that I saw come up in a Amnesty International work, and so that's why I wanted to bring it up because free will doesn't exist. They cannot be held accountable to the actions that they're committing. So why would you punish someone if they're not accountable to the acts that they've committed?
Because we're compelled by our lack of free will to do so.
Yes.
Well,
that's
the thing.
To remove these dysfunctional units from society, if this is what they want to go with.
Yeah, I mean,
or to change the equation further upstream so that other more deterministically minded or predetermined action sets are guided in the correct direction.
Like this train of thought can go into like labor camps very fast, so let's not go there.
Yeah, well, that's why I found it interesting. It's just so wacky that I don't know how anyone can be of that opinion, even if you question free will.
There's fundamentally no point in arguing with a hard determinist, because either they're already going to be on your side at the end of the conversation, because you're just determined to be that way, or there's nothing you can do to influence them anyway. And either way, it was a waste of time to engage in the conversation.
Well, I don't want to argue with them, but I'm compelled to do so.
There might not be complete free will, but you do have some choice in stuff. So it's not. I don't think it's a dichotomy where you can say, well, I have complete free will and it's independent of any biological process, and neither is that you're completely instinctive. But yeah, instincts and things, learned behavior does influence you, but you still have some degree of control.
It is by will alone I set my mind in motion.
Very well. What's that? It's not Peter de Vries. That's the other one. It's from Dune.
I think that was Peter.
I'm gonna look that one up.
Just because Iron Duke in the chat has just mentioned transporting people to Australia as a form of punishment, and if we could go back to banishment, I'd be more than happy to do so. I just don't know where you put people.
Well, this is one thing I wanted to bring up later, is that in a materialistic sense, both prison and execution are sort of like wastes of human resources. God, that sounds so crass to say, but anyway.
Well, one of the interesting points that is not necessarily visible at first glance when you look at banishment or transfer to penal colonies such as Australia is they are functionally death sentences. the individual is removed in their entirety from the environment wherein they committed the crime. So they are dead for all intents and purposes. Imprisonment, on the other hand, keeps them tangibly within that society.
I mean, for the purposes of being able to exist in civil society, yes. But usually in these cases, so when you're talking about penal colonies, you're particularly Australia, you're sort of expanding the frontiers of the civil society itself. So the prisoners go in and they effectively undergo the process of civilizing Australia for then later colonists to come and sort of settle into. So
and there's also
still,
generally
they're still providing a very good service to the rest of civil society.
Well, there's also a secondary concern, which is basically if you still manage to get banished to Australia and still screw up long enough or hard enough, or commit some other massive crime within the context of Australia, they have the death penalty there. So.
Well, yes, in a penal colony of that kind, if you go there and you still have not altered your behaviour, then you're going to get pretty swift retribution pretty bloody quickly.
Well, I guess this first the question of what do you do with people that actively oppose the society they're living in? And as
you reform them.
Yeah, this is one. I guess prisons were once thought as, or on the other hand, prisoners were brought in because in the after and during the Middle Ages, the execution numbers shot up drastically, and after this, I think the Calvinists invented prison to lock people away for their own betterment. But the real question behind this is all: what do you do with people that oppose your society? And I guess banishment is one thing, killing them is another, but I guess prison works only so far if you lock them up. If they're younger guys, let them run out of testosterone and try to get them back into society. But if this mechanism fails, what do you do with them? Do you brand them? Do you kill them? Do you shoot them on Mars? Or what do you do with them? Because they're a detriment to your well-being of the society they're living in.
All three responses are essentially doing the same thing. You're removing them from society. If you banish them, then you've got rid of them and you've put them elsewhere. Obviously, execution, you're getting rid of them, and prison, you're just putting them in a place that is exclusively reserved for people that you're removing from society.
Well, in both of the cases,
it's the reintegration that is the issue to a degree.
Well, one of the secondary concerns of the permanent imprisonment is there's other population within the prison environment that is going to be cycling through and returning to society.
Even worse at some points. I guess prisoners are notorious for making a soft criminal into a hardened prisoner with learning all the skills he learned in prison.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's really not in most countries.
Well, okay, that's definitely the case in America. Our prisons are notorious for causing people to need to like compulsively need to join one or more prisoner factions within the prison in order to survive their stint.
Let's not beat around the bush. They're ethnic-based gangs. If you go in there and you don't join a gang that is of your own ethnicity, you don't last long, for the most part.
Well, obviously, my personal knowledge is significantly lacking, so I'll cede to Albion's greater experience and knowledge.
Yeah, my experience. Yes, I am part. No, I'm not even going to say that's a joke. That'll get me taken off. Let's move on. Anything on this that you actually think is valuable? Then I think all of the. To be honest, I think this is probably the weakest group of slides. So let's move.
Well, their strongest point is the non-deterrence, which is true, but that's only primarily true because it's not actually enforced when it is a potential result of the crime.
Actually, I immediately take that statement back and say that the next slide is probably the worst. It's the most entertaining one, though.
Just get it through.
It's barbaric. Why are you trying to send us back in time to our barbaric age of murder? What's wrong with you?
Shush,
We're more civilized than that, don't you see?
Well, first of all, the human condition hasn't really changed. The only thing that has changed is technology, which in most part has covered up a lot of human failures, if you want to call that, or societal breakdowns we might have experienced in the last, I don't know, 100 years. So you can't really compare it, I guess.
Like seeing all points at the slide, it can be countered with, yeah, but that's just all your opinion, man. Like that is moralism, what I see here, and that's not universal. That's not an argument.
Well, if you take the third one, it says you're impeding our progress to a better world. So basically, you're saying, well,
I may have worded that intentionally.
yeah. So the progressive will say, well, any change we do is towards a more ideal world. To at some point we'll have replicators and we'll go warp 8 and save the environment and have the Prime Directive, and everybody will be beyond scarcity society, and that's some utopian thinking, trying to create heaven on earth. The thing is, you still have to deal with parts of your society which will selfishly, actively work against that better world.
The issue with this mindset that I saw coming through in some of them, is that you can a belief that you can fundamentally change human nature and a progressive view of history, neither of which I believe. So none of these, actually have any effect. That being said, sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, there's also the genetic determinist view, where you could make the argument that the process of civilization, particularly in northwestern Europe, has been a process of removing the most violent elements from the gene pool, effectively, and so the process of civilization requires this quote unquote barbarity in order to continue on its trajectory, on its upward trajectory.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, no, that's a horrible thing to say. We can just listen to Imagine, listen to John Lennon. Why do you want this world, this brutal barbaric world? What did I put down here?
Well, they're talking about a 25% increase in the murder rate per 100,000 people, which sure, but we are talking such a small sample size that there's a very real possibility of there being significant noise in the statistics. And then that takes us back to our damned lies and statistics point.
Yeah, they also love this word, brutalization of society, this term. They use it constantly in a lot of the articles I was looking at. Did you find that it may have been worded slightly different in the German, but did you find that a lot as well, iTunes?
Not in this, but a lot of rhetorical tricks or mixing in together stuff or whatever, I guess.
Well, and this also makes a distinction between everything up to but not including murder. So all sorts of other crimes are listed as being acceptable and excluded from this, despite the fact that they would themselves, in a lot of cases, qualify for the death penalty due to their heinousness. But the last point, the countries that use the death penalty are totalitarian, is completely objectively false, because there are non-totalitarian countries that
this is one of the ones I wanted most interesting to get your response on. So you go ahead.
I was just going to say it's conclusively obviously false, because there are countries that use the death penalty that are not totalitarian.
I mean, sorry to interject here, but this doesn't hold at all. I mean, in the current day, maybe if you talk about Saudi Arabia, China, okay, I give you that. But if you go back in time, was England in the 1940s totalitarian? I would argue against it. If you're an anarchist, you're definitions sometimes aren't really valid because whatever comes from the state is totalitarian. So I guess this goes out the window. On the other point, a lot of the quote unquote countries in the Middle Ages used the death penalty, and I would assume the government had a lot less power over you than now. I mean, just think on the current situation. During the Black Plague, they didn't have that problem. I get whatever.
Well, the Black Plague was kind of a self-solving situation.
Yeah, but there wasn't some American doctor or whatever doctor running around,
telling you needed your face panty.
Yeah, exactly.
But look at the company you're keeping. Do you really want the US to be in league with China and Saudi Arabia?
I'm not gonna comment, otherwise I probably will get your channel nuked.
I think that in far too many ways we already are.
Yeah, what I was about to say. Like, how are they not in bed with each other?
Yeah.
We said we'll keep off Kamala. Let's.
Oosh.
I was thinking about two stacks Biden.
Yeah, well, yeah. This is the same person.
Yes.
And this is the condoning violence in your society is again objectively false. It's condemning violence in the society, and then the barbarism is. There are many and varied ways to kill someone barbarically and brutally, none of which are involved in modern applications of the death penalty. Now, the Romans, on the other hand, they had all sorts of interesting ideas in that regard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the ethics of flailing. That is the better discussion.
Well, that goes to your point. If you want to, try and socialize the crowd, I suppose that the more barbaric, quote unquote, the better the effect on the crowd.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking. Public execution by torture.
Yeah, well, but torture wasn't really well received on the research I did because mostly the crowd was rooting for the person that got executed and wanted him. Bestowed mercy on him, but I guess if you execute him anyhow because the folks knew, okay, he done something terrible, I guess the postmodern takes come in again.
It depends on the period because in the sort of medieval era, more particularly, that is a more general thing, regardless of whether or not they were being tortured to death or whether they were just being executed, because it was seen as a sort of mercy in bringing them to God's judgment earlier to stop them from being able to harm their soul anymore and things like that.
So what you're saying is that a good stoning will always attract a crowd.
Well, yes, if you're talking Arab Arab lands, definitely, or.
I was thinking I'd say that they were rooting for the person being executed because everybody likes a good redemption story. It's a really good story that if they're being executed but they're actually innocent, so the rope breaks or somehow the executioner's blade will miss. That makes a really good story. Something you can tell your grandchildren. So you kind of root for that because yeah.
Well, one of the interesting things in that regard was the historical Jewish tradition of having the rabbi pronounce judgment, and they would have people put their hands in boiling water, and I recently heard that the Jews at the time figured out a way to make dry ice. So if the rabbi knew the person was falsely accused, they'd put dry ice in the cauldron, and when they put their hand in it, they were unburned, which gave them an opportunity to essentially veto popular mania where people were falsely accused for no reason. So there was a moral level of divine judgment that was utilized to correct and defend society against false accusations like that.
So what you're saying is that the death penalty has always been rigged and the system has always been as unfair and biased.
Always has been.
That's justice amongst hominids.
I actually want to just go in a little bit more detail on comparing the two ideas that we have of the death penalty, because I've just got to hand Monday Morning Blues, which is a collection of essays by Peter Hitchen, and the very first one in there is his experience going to see someone get electrocuted, and he describes it in this very somber tone. It's sort of it's hush hush, it's quiet, it's reserved. Everyone knows that they're there for a purpose, but there's no other emotion than that. And I think to someone like Hitchens, that is the ideal. But we can compare that to some of the other ideas that are being put forward here, like public stoning, and it's sort of that socialization which is involved, because much like we found in Lord of the Flies, when everyone gets their hands bloodied, they're all part of the enforcement of the punishment, so they're kind of all accountable to following the standards which led to the stoning. And
it's a functional way to get moral buy-in from the members of the society, and further, it brings to the front of consciousness the visceralness of condemning someone to death. There's a visceral understanding and appreciation between the observer and the executed that is just not present in any other mechanism of punishment. It one of the core fears that humans have is mortality, and being confronted with it as a result of a horrible crime, at least as judged by society, is a way to reinforce that and force society to not only deal with the crime, but also recognize and confront mortality.
Yes, I've just seen there's another branding in the chat, so you're multiplying. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? I just found it interesting.
Well,
to compare the two.
On this note about the death penalty, I think Foucault even mentioned this, that the death penalty first was public, then it was only a circle of high-ranking officials, whatnot, or people that, or a limited crowd, then only to the people, to an invited crowd, and then it went to only the people that had to be there, so the executioner, maybe the prison ward, and medical staff or whatever. And after that, the next step was abolishment. So maybe this plays a role, but I don't know. Just something to think.
Yeah, I had a quick look at his book on that, which again, is it Crime and Punish? No, Death and Punishment, something like that. And the chapter where he specifically goes into that is called, I think, The Gallows as a Spectacle. So yeah, it's probably closest to L.F. Graves, I think, where you're using the spectacle of the event as the socializing element. Am I misrepresenting you there, or is that correct, Graves?
No, that's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so this will be an interesting one for certain members of the conversation.
The book was called Discipline and Punish, I think.
Discipline and Punish. That's it. Religious responses.
No. I actually further researched this. Well, I guess at first I want to hear Branding's take as a Lutheran, and yeah.
Yes. Well,
the commandment is that thou shalt not murder, not thou shalt not kill.
Exactly. And on this one, well, let's just let Albion make his point, then we can shred him to pieces.
I feel like a punching bag today. No, yes, we made this point on the last episode that the bastardization of the term came about, unfortunately, in the translation into the King James Bible, which kind of surprised me that they wouldn't have got that right. But
really,
no, it was already there. There was already a false the article is in German. I can send you, but there was something, I think, from Greek into Latin. There was a mistranslation, and then it got even was wrongly translated from Latin into English, I guess. But don't quote me on that, but something to that effect.
Yeah,
I would make the argument that the contemporary who did the quote-unquote mistranslation wasn't mistranslating anything.
I think it was Luther.
He was divinely inspired.
I think it was intentional, and I think that the person doing the translating was probably not a Christian.
Wasn't the translation by Luther?
Interesting.
The Luther translation is "Du sollst nicht töten."
Yes.
I actually have the Luther Bible right beside me, so
yes.
Try me.
Well,
what's the actual definition of totem then?
Well, it is to kill, to take someone's life.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was to make dead, but as I said, my German is about 20 years out of date.
That's okay.
Yeah, regardless of the origins of it, I just found it was interesting to see just how far back it went that it was being mistranslated. But there were plenty of sources where they were trying to push quotes of religious figures, or in this case, the Alliance of Reformed Churches, which is, it sounds like an authoritative source of information for Christian values. Where the death penalty is implemented, God's redeeming love is violated. How does that make you feel, Brandy?
Well, I don't know which God they're talking about, but it's not my God.
Doesn't somebody who's on death row have more chances to repent than somebody who dies in an accident? So wouldn't this be more lenient than just shooting them on sight or something like that? I mean, so plenty of chances to repent and while having your last meal.
This is what happens when people worship the zeitgeist instead of of God.
Yeah, well, just rub it in. Okay, for everybody who wants to take me up on this, it's Exodus 21:12. Is the spicy parts in the Bible. If you, for example, 21:15, who punches mother or father should die. As 21:16, who human robs, I guess, himself should die. Yeah, who curses mother and father should die. Yeah, I guess you can read the rest of it.
But don't you know that the only part of the Bible that matters is the first 4 books of the New Testament?
First of all, I'm not a biblical scholar, but if you have a book, the Old Testament, that's about 1,200 pages, and the New Testament is only 400 something, I guess the Old Testament has something to say.
That's the constant argument I'm hearing from people, is that the new generation Christians disregard the entirety of the Old Testament in favor of the first 4 books of the Gospel, which is
I quite often hear them say that it supersedes what came before it because it's it's a revised edition.
Yeah, it's which by supersede they mean I can completely ignore all of that stuff about shellfish and cloven hooves and whatnot.
And God said to Paul, "Disregard all the words I said before. Here is a complete new setup." But that would also mean that the 10 Commandments are not set right.
Yeah,
because the only commandment you need is do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah, actually, a Catholic priest tried this to me. I talked to him about the death penalty, and he talked something about the law of love, and I was just in my head where I don't want to disrespect the priest, but where does this stuff come from? Honestly, I'm not a biblical scholar, but I could see through that. That's and that's a Catholic church. Branding might have an issue with that, but whatever.
To quote the Clockwork Orange, I like the God of the Old Testament.
Yes,
exactly. I'm more a fan of, and just a personal point. So get this through. This if you repent, you will go into heaven. Why should I go to heaven? Maybe I have done some stuff. I should take a suffrage, and maybe only then I can repent. But just a personal gripe, I guess.
Well, that's mortal sins versus venial sins, but that I think is primarily Catholic doctrine. But I'm Lutheran, and we were the original Protestants, so don't tell me that I like the Catholic Church.
I blame the Protestants on the rising murder rate, executions during the Middle Ages, and putting some smirch on the death penalty in general, or the topic about the executions in the Middle Ages. But whatever.
But Christian brought up Calvinists, and Calvinists are your religious harsh determinists, or hard determinists.
Yeah, which is counterintuitive because, as you say, you saw in the Middle Ages a huge increase in the amount of executions, and yet, they are you can't get more deterministic than a Calvinist. So it's a bit of a counterintuitive combination. You also another interesting contradiction, purely intentional, obviously, because it's just rhetoric. But these arguments where it's you can't be a true Christian if you're against. If you're in favor of the death penalty. Because,
no, true Scotsman.
Well, the thing is, these are arguments made by the exact same people that will say, well, how can you believe the Bible? Because it contradicts itself all the time, because you have a loving God, and then you also have Jesus saying that he's going to come with a sword. So it's obviously just being used as a way of pushing an argument.
Well, in German, there's a nice saying, Zucker und Peitsche, which means sugar and... I don't know the other at the moment, but I think it's something to punch you with. Yeah, leash. So I guess that's the right word for that.
Sugar bread and leash, yes.
Yeah, it's just the carrot and the stick. It's the classic. Yeah. We'll try and get you positively, and then if not, we'll do it negatively.
It's the exact same metaphor, yes.
But to rapid fire these responses, it's against Christianity. No, it's not. Read the actual Bible. There's a lot of death in it. Much of it is supported by God. A man cannot repent if we execute him. Actually, in a lot of cases, the only time a man will consider repenting is when he's about to face execution.
Also, that is what purgatory is for. Again,
Catholic dogma. It is vengeful, not justice. That's justice is, at least biblically, eye for an eye is not outside of the realm of biblical justice. It goes against our human rights and our right to life. No one has a right to life in the eyes of God, and human rights aren't a thing religiously. All it is religious doctrine is what religions recognize. So if you have religious rights, and then how can you oppose abortion and support the death penalty? This isn't really a religious argument per se.
I was just splitting them up. It fell into that a little bit.
The absolute innocence of the aborted fetus versus the convicted guilt of the person facing the death penalty is one significant distinction between the two groups.
It's interesting because again, you could flip that on its head very easily and say, well, if you're in favor of the abortion, you're not completely opposed to taking of life. So what is your moral justification for opposing the death penalty?
Well,
it's never turned that way round. But you know why? Because it's just not, they are actually completely two different issues.
It's rhetoric. It's pretty simple. Yeah. I'm for the taking of, I'm for the preserving of innocent life, and that's about it. And if you earn the death penalty, you're not innocent.
Yeah. The only reason it's an interesting point to have on there is that it does show that fundamentally there's almost no one that's opposed to the taking of life for no reason.
That is the most shit tier argument I've ever seen by libtards. Like literally, that is like, wow.
But honestly, I've heard that one used a lot. It's very popular.
That's why it's shit tier.
I just thought it's worth putting on there, and the question is, in what situations is it justifiable to take human life? It's not, is it justifiable? Because there are very few people that actually believe it's not justified in all circumstances. And I think the benefit of having this argument is that you can at least demonstrate that. So, following on from this slide, just more general moral responses, or think of the children responses as you might prefer to think of them. If you're taking a human life as punishment, you're no better than the murderer.
One is a sort of procedural response. The other is willing immorality. They're very different. If the punishment for a crime is death, then the right thing to do in a procedural sense is to execute the person who meets that criteria. That's completely different to choosing to kill somebody for whatever other reason.
What if they didn't? What if they hadn't committed murder? What if it was something like treason? You're taking a life in retribution for an act that wasn't murder.
Well, if treason leads to the murder of other people that you consider of your tribe, then execute him.
Yeah, I mean betrayal is even worse because that's willing ill to your own people.
Well,
you have to think of the amount of damages that you do. So if you just murder somebody, you take somebody's life. But if you do treason, then it affects so many people's life.
Exactly.
Snowden should be killed. Yeah.
All of these
Obviously.
go to the level at which the society values life. So societies that have significant value toward individual life are likely to have more stringent requirements for application of the death penalty versus societies that are much more communitarian and would thereby have lower levels. Yeah, the child. I can't even, Christian. I'm sorry. That's wholly incomprehensible to me.
But it is actually a strain of thought on some of the very libertarian circles. The kind of it is this symbiote that until it's born has no. It's impeding on your person.
I understand that, and the only case in which that is actually a valid argument is in the event of rape. But I am hoping. I am looking forward strongly to the day in which we have artificial wombs, so that completely and totally sidesteps that argument. Because then you just transplant the fetus into the womb, and it is the responsibility of the parent to pay for said fetus. If they engaged in sex willingly, or if they didn't,
then you go to the hatchery,
and then you have people complaining about the fact that their 6-year-old is just eating all their food and living in their house, and they're living like parasites, and they probably should go to a nursery where they can be happy, and so maybe the state can take them over, and people should take their responsibility and know that this happens.
Like in libertarian circles, there has been an innovation on that. Like the last time I looked, it's like that you have a silent contract with the child until you raise it until it is adult, basically.
I mean, it was actually that sort of thing that got me off some of the libertarian thinking, because I was like, when you have to do so many somersaults to explain yourself when it comes to being a mother, then there might be some flaws with having this purely, contract sort of view of the world.
Yes, it reminds me of the movement in, I think it was astronomy, where they were starting from the assertion that all orbits must be circular. Therefore, in order to make the actual orbits match the models, they had to just keep adding circles within circles. At some point, you just have to acknowledge that the model's wrong.
Yeah. So what else we got? An interesting one. So this was actually phrased in a way that it was purely emotional, but it was you could see it as a decent argument, not against the death penalty, but against the length of time in which people are incarcerated, waiting trial. That if someone has committed a murder and they've shot them and that person has died, you're putting them in a cage for 12 years and then killing them. So it's immoral for you to be locking them up like an animal and then disposing of them decades later.
Sounds like a house for the elderly.
Yeah, I mean you're not wrong there, but that's not a problem with the death penalty. That's a problem with people not actually looking after their relations.
I would say that the only valid argument I've seen thus far, or rather the most valid argument, is this: it can kill innocence, which is really a stake through the heart of the death penalty, at least from a moral perspective. Again, one can't be 100% accurate, but the only counter argument to that is a religious one, in that if you do accidentally kill someone, despite having followed all the proper policies, procedures, and rules of evidentiary presentation, you still commit them to God, so God can make that right.
Well, there is another counter argument to that, in that you have to compare that against the lives that are lost for releasing a killer who you would have otherwise executed, and then if he goes on to kill someone else, that's another innocent life lost.
But that's still moral responsibility, moral culpability is on the murderer. They can choose not to murder in the future.
Yeah,
yes, yes, yeah. Though
I'm not saying it's enough to disabuse me of my support for death penalty. I'm saying that is the argument I find most compelling.
I think most people in favor of the death penalty must find this the most compelling argument against it. I'd be hard pressed to think of anything that even if there are other ones that may have some merit, I think this is always going to be the sticking point, isn't it?
Well, it has to be. If you're going to be morally consistent, it absolutely has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, but still, the chances are very, very slim. I think it's only 1.5% that might be.
Yes, well, it's interesting because obviously when on the last conversation we had, we came to that figure. You had brought up the figure of, I think, around 1%. Here they've said 4%. I saw another one that said 3%. Again, I don't know how they're getting these figures, but none of them are, double digits.
Sorry, go ahead.
None of them are double digits. They're usually between 1% and 4% that I've seen.
Well, yeah. That's still 1% and 4% more than it should be. That's an infinite number more than there should be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but I guess the number of 4% comes up if you add all the people that are innocent or were dishonored or not dishonored. It was established that they are innocent, so they take them into these numbers. But I took them out because if you're innocent and did not get executed, you're not probably innocent. You didn't get executed. You might.
That's a very sneaky way of boosting up the numbers. That is kind of
yes,
disgraceful.
What
they've been convicted, but it's not been carried out. But you're going to include them in the figures.
Well, I suspect. I don't have proof. I haven't calculated it for that point, but yeah. I suspect
the way that it's worded makes me think, this is like people who are on death row and not people who are actually were executed.
However, that would then be a justification as to why the process takes 10, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to a swift punishment, which we've kind of agreed that we would support something a bit swifter, but with expedience comes less ability to fight back against the conviction.
Yeah,
opportunity, correct.
Yeah, well, and on the other point, maybe not all most of. Okay, let's rephrase this. A lot of people that are on death row didn't just happen to go onto death row. They have a lot of other crimes under their belt, and if they did not get executed for what they were initially tried, a lot of them still were in some shape, way, guilty. Maybe not for this case, and yes, it's going to Derek in the more soft points, I guess. Oh, they're not innocent for this case, but they may have done something else. Just a lot of the people that get executed did not just happen to be there, just to keep in mind.
Yeah, you don't normally wind up on death row if you've only had speeding tickets in your criminal past, generally. Even if you're convicted of committing a murder, they generally still won't execute you.
Unless you're a Jeffrey Dahmer or something. It depends on what kind of criminal you are, I suppose.
Well,
Yeah,
assuming that you're not found conclusively guilty, as in you're just, because it's reasonable doubt, at least in America. So it's possible there's no reasonable doubt, despite there being actual doubt and the guy didn't do it.
Yeah, but I guess with Jeffrey Dahmer, there were around 50 cases of reasonable doubt that he didn't do it. So if he didn't suffer for one, he would at least suffer for another victim, and he got executed for all of them. So I don't see a problem in this case.
Yeah. I mean, when you're literally telling people where you have human heads, I think reasonable doubt probably goes out the window. But what I was trying to demonstrate is that the speeding ticket thing. You can have these sort of serial killers that are very under the radar. So it's not always the case. It depends on what attracts them to the crime. If it's, for financial gain, then yeah, you're probably looking at someone that has more of a criminal history. But for those kind of people, because it's more of a pleasure in the act itself, I think you don't usually find as much of a criminal past.
Mm-hmm.
Cruel and unusual punishment. I saw that phrase being used a few times and it just made me laugh. So I thought I'd put it in. Obviously, a callback to slavery, because that's always what you need to do when you're arguing against anything.
So what's the proposal? Make it more usual.
Well, again, yes. So again, in the United States, 3% of executions between 1890 and 2010 were botched. Now, this alone makes me wonder. This is a 120-year period, and then they go on to talk about the lethal injection.
Yeah.
Now, I cannot imagine the lethal injection was being used in 1890.
Yeah, no, but lethal injection is. I think the FDA outlawed the ingredient you need to kill somebody with the lethal injection. And on my point, I don't really care if you get how you get executed. For my taste, it could be guillotine, firing squad, or the North Korean sample, I guess. But I don't really care.
They can euthanize dogs, making them go to sleep, and then they don't feel anything, so they can do that in humans as well.
Yeah. But I guess euthanasia brings some weird topic up. I'm not going to afford to elaborate.
Well, the euthanasia apparently support communism, so yeah, it's definitely a lot of weird topics.
But anyhow,
apparently my pun fell on deaf ears.
Yeah, sorry. The saying, well, we had botched executions just means that, well, we need better technology to do it. And you're not going to tell me that even the French could invent a more humane way to execute people.
I support this idea.
Now, Christian.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Again, how many botched attempts? I know that you can botch it, but with the guillotine, do you really think it was 3% of executions were botched?
The guillotine was. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
No, they got it down to pretty precise science.
Well, I guess at some point the blade would not be sharp anymore.
It actually would not matter, because the fallbeil, I don't know the English term, is very, very heavy still, and it's high enough, so even if it's blunt, it will
break a neck.
Your neck up. Yeah, break your neck up, or just split it apart a crude way, but I guess, and even the guillotine, a fun fact or fun interesting fact, was used in the French Revolution because of its equalizing force, because all people were equal, because some people are knights and whatnot were executed by sword. That was more of the honorable thing to do than get hung by a stick, because with men, if you get hung, you get an erection. That's something to consider. But
if you get hung, you get hung.
Now,
sorry,
now.
hard, yes.
poor taste.
What about Albin? Maybe you can answer this. What about the guillotine and people with really thick necks?
if you tried to behead Ernest,
It would bounce off.
Yeah, you might need a couple of attempts.
That's been a rumor, but I don't think there are any actual examples of that, because there was a rumor that Louis the 16th, his neck was too thick and it took a couple of tries, but I think that's been debunked.
It's been debunked.
Debunked, yes.
Somebody said it was not true. It sounded plausible, so we won't believe in it anymore.
I think the Mythbusters did an episode on that.
It's probably bullshit, but I believe it.
Yes, I do agree that we shouldn't be using the guillotine because it's too French.
Oui, oui.
Oui, baguette.
So this is more, from a legalistic point of view. Some of the arguments I put together.
Well, I agree with the first point.
Yeah, exactly. Why should we trust that the courts should take a human life when they're useless at everything else?
No argument here.
Well, it's an argument for improving the courts, not necessarily abolishing the death penalty. It's a sort of separate issue.
Aha.
Parallel, but separate.
You've activated the trap card. We've already discussed that in human systems, they're always going to be inherently flawed. So how are we going to improve the system when it is still operated by humans?
I know. By giving people actual reason to come to the correct decision, rather than just having them all be all enter from a position of theoretical neutrality.
Or we could outsource it to the French.
The whole skin in the game idea.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. What about this? And I don't actually know if you covered this in your research, iTunes. Everyone's love of Norway and the Scandinavians. Their recidivism is the lowest in the world, and it's essentially like staying in a 5-star hotel when you get imprisoned.
I think that's true, but Norway isn't known for heavy criminals, so I guess most of them are first-time convicts, speeding tickets. I purely suspect this, but it wouldn't surprise me if it would be true. So it's not like the US where you've got hardened criminal gangs and whatnot.
Well, one of the things that is conclusively true sociologically for the Norwegian states is the massive cultural homogeneity that was present throughout them for the last century or 5. So there's a great amount of evidence that they're culturally dissimilar from pretty much everywhere else in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, they've got the additional layer of geographical isolation, so they haven't been able to be bound together in the same way that somewhere like Britain has, where all you need to do is lay down a railway and suddenly everywhere's connected. Norway has continued to have, probably slightly less so now, but just because of the way that the geography of the country is set up, then you've got more localized communities.
Basically, in short, they have a better society.
Well, and certainly a more in-group focused and homogenous society.
Yeah.
And I also, this may be wrong, but from memory, there were 2 countries, it was Norway and someone else, that would essentially exchange their highest danger criminals so that they weren't being guarded by people that they may know because of the small population. So they would basically swap over the worst offenders. so that they were sort of more in isolation. I don't know. I'm pretty sure that I saw that on a documentary about it. So it must be true.
Might be Denmark, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I've got a feeling it was Denmark.
Logically, it would be Denmark, just for historical reasons. But yeah.
Following on from that, kind of paired with the top one as well, is that by being in favor of the death penalty, you're handing more power over your life to the state.
Well, privatize then.
Now, I would argue this is one justice is one of the really legitimate powers of the state that it should use. But I guess the state is nowadays involved in everything, or the state in the current form we have it is involved in justice and will not get out of it. So it should at least do justice right, I guess.
At the risk of lowering the tone somewhat, believing that in the modern day the state can't just choose arbitrarily when you're going to die as a cope, just because it says on a piece of paper that they can't do that is not going to stop them from deciding that you need to die or just be removed or have your life ruined.
Mm-hmm. Paper shields are remarkably poor at stopping bullets.
Yes, of course.
Exactly.
If you're talking about the current regime, I think if they would start rounding certain people up and executing them, I think you don't need a paper, you need a bulletproof vest. But
sounds inefficient. Just first rounding them up and then shooting them. You can skip a step if you're in that process. It's just me optimizing stuff. So,
well, you would do, wouldn't you?
Well, I mean, you're in the right mindset to start fixing these courts.
Yeah, just
comes naturally to you.
Skips a number of steps, like
Someone's mentioned Breivik, which I don't even know if saying the name. No, that's gone away now. No one cares about that now. I actually feel like he was demonstrating against when he was in prison. I'm fairly certain he did a couple of like destroying his TV and then requesting a new one and getting it granted to him, things like that, which has happened. There's been people do that in British prisons as well, where to kind of demonstrate just how luxurious their cages are, they'll trash the room and then get moved to a new one whilst they get renovated, like repeatedly, to demonstrate just how crazy it is. If I remember correctly, Breivik did that.
Yeah, I mean, even the case Breivik is in my country, Switzerland. It's the case as well. If I would go on a mass shooting, I have plans to do so. Just to throw that out there. But the highest chance of me is getting, I think, 25 years, whatever I have done, or get sent into the mental hospital. So, I mean, it's just a point of meekness. Why should I, or Breivik for that matter, have the ability to survive after I killed that many people?
Yeah, this idea has a fairly long history. Carlyle was talking about it in I believe the 1840s. So yeah, the idea that why should we be treating prisoners better than common citizens, because a writer, for example, has to earn their keep and work on their passion project at the same time. Whereas if a prisoner were to be working on their magnum opus, then they'd have all of their needs met whilst they do whatever they like with all their time. That's not even a privilege that you grant to some of your best artists. So why give it to prisoners?
Just one magnum opus? I don't think that's enough.
You beat me to it.
That's also the thing that some elderly are saying, that they might as well commit a crime and be sent to prison because prison is more luxurious than the elderly home.
Yes, that was a little conversation happening in chat that I wanted to bring up.
I've always said if I was homeless, I'd do that. Not that I have any plans of doing it, but if I ever found myself on the streets, would you not rather just get arrested and get yourself 3 square meals a day?
When you add
you probably would be told you're insane, so you need help, so you won't be in prison. It's some kind of inverse catch-22.
Possibly.
Yeah, but then you go to an institution and you get pampered as well as fed 3 times a day. So
getting your ass wiped.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that when you add in the added dimension of immigration, it gets even more messy, because then people can be potentially coming from a place where their mental framework for the cost benefit analysis of committing a crime is completely skewed by the fact that they'll be looking at it from the outside and saying, why wouldn't I risk going to prison if prison is going to be better than my life on this like minimum wage job.
Yeah, famously, the Russian mob say this all the time. Like when they were operating with the Italian mob in the US, they would quite often do a lot of the dirty work because they just didn't care. They're like, if I get arrested here, whatever, it's a holiday for a few years, and then I'm back out on the streets. Whereas if I'd stayed home in Albania or Russia or any of like the Eastern European gangs that moved over, I would actually face punishment.
Well, and they also had the situation where mobsters would take retirement and they'd go and do one last job for the mob and get convicted, and spend the rest of their life in prison, having a fun, gay old time.
You had a lot of thieves in the former Soviet Union because you didn't have any private property. So and the state had said that there's no theft. So as long as you didn't steal from the state, you basically could do what you want. And then they asked, like, when the Second World War, when the Germans were there, were you also stealing? No, because they would shoot us on sight. So because there was no punishment for it, you had people doing this crime. So,
well, if no one owned it, they weren't stealing, were they?
Yeah, exactly. So and also you have to take into account that if the state says that, for example, that there's no tuberculosis in the state, that then the doctor can never diagnose it because it doesn't exist, so he won't treat it. So you get those kind of things. Solzhenitsyn is fun to read.
That's one word. That's one word to use to describe it.
Fun is interesting description, but yes. So we kind of covered this already on its application not being standardized, which again can very easily just be an argument to bolster its application.
The EU can easily standardize death penalties across the EU. So, and also that it's very costly. That's just a matter of optimization. We can with mass producing stuff, we can make execution very cheap.
Well, the only problem is the EU has outlawed the death penalty. For example, Switzerland can't, even we're sort of independent of the Fourth Reich, we can't do it because we signed a treaty with the EU saying we can't do it.
Yeah, but that's just a paper shield.
The thing is also, it's not random. It's about where you are, what judge you get. It's random is the false word.
Probably what a greater factor is if the judge just had lunch or not, because if he just had lunch, then it's more probably lenient. So
I think that to your point is it's limited, not random.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of what I consider to be best politicians said the best way to get rid of a bad law is to enforce it. So we need to start enforcing this stuff, and then we'll find out whether the law is good or the law is bad.
Yeah, well, that's the whole premise of Hitchen's The War We Never Fought, which I will push again. And I think I've pushed when we were talking about him last, that the argument on the war on drugs is completely pointless, as we've never seen it happen for at least the last 65 years. Because it doesn't matter what law you have on the books, if it's not being enforced, people know what the actual justice structure is and will act accordingly. Okay, a couple more here. So again, we discussed this one previously. The execution is very costly. It's far too expensive. It's more expensive to execute someone than it is to keep them in prison. So how can you justify it on a material basis?
Process.
As a side note, to put Timothy McVeigh to death will cost $13 million. This was something that I read.
You just need to optimize it, making it a Mac execution, and then it will be really cheap. It's just
Well, again, this is the classic process problem. The reason it's expensive is the appeals process takes forever and a day.
Yeah,
And
my argument was
that
that
is not.
I've never seen $1 million piece of rope before, but
And that's not due to the capital punishment system. That's due to the general poor functioning of the entire legal system in America anyway. One of the first things that you do is you sign away your right to a speedy trial if you want to actually have a trial. Because the discovery process takes months, if not years, in most significant cases. So one of the first things you have to sign is say, no, I'm not going to. I'm going to forego my right to a speedy trial in the understanding that is going to give you a better opportunity to defend yourself if you don't have a speedy trial.
I think we're just we're going to lose Graves. So Thank you for joining us. It was good to have you on. Yes. Sorry, because I saw that. I just kind of lost where we are.
And then sentencing due to poor defense that's a non-starter. It's the vast reason for all of this is most people accused of capital offenses are going to get public defenders anyway, just by the self-selection bias of those either committing those crimes or thought to be committing those crimes and prosecuted for those crimes. So obviously the defense is going to be substandard.
Yes.
And another problem with the American justice system is the overload of the public defenders, in that they have 10 or 12 or sometimes more concurrent cases they have to manage and support. So they can't spend any significant amount of time on any one of them individually. So
yeah, again, it's procedural. Okay, I feel like we missed one, which I wanted to bring up. Yes. Does anyone want to tackle that?
Well, if you do the crime, you get the punishment. That's all I say.
Yes. Okay. Moving on.
Well, no, go. This is not something that should be just ignored. The point is that this is capital offenses are generally considered to be grievous offenses against the rights and property of other individuals. But if one has very little property and one doesn't value one's life or one's rights significantly, primarily due to the fact of physical deprivation, it's not inconceivable that they would undertake actions that would not be considered within the realm of possibility for those in better off situations. So this disproportionate application or commission of crimes is a logical outcome of a different value hierarchy. If one doesn't value human life highly, it doesn't surprise people, or it shouldn't surprise anyone, that they would shoot someone over a pair of sneakers.
Yes, and this end one ties in very nicely to obviously the poor defense argument, where it's just a case of they're using their resources to obviously try and prevent the capital punishment. And if you have a public defender, you don't have the option to do that. Whereas you get a public defender if you don't have the ability to pay for something yourself. So obviously you're going to see a more likely people of a wealthier background get off and people that are relying on public defenders not, because they've just got better defenders.
I mean, I would also add that you're just generally carrying a hell of a lot of assumptions into that conclusion. To get to that conclusion, I should say, because you're making assumptions about who's committing crime and why, and who's in what sort of situation in society and why.
Yes, I mean that ignores this a little bit and goes on to the other. Yes, but I think that is something that we could either go into and be on it for a while, or we could skip past.
I just want to jump above that. The punishment is usually worse than the crime. That's just flat out conclusively false.
I mean, if you
capital punishment is fundamentally never used in a situation where that's not as a result of an egregious crime of some way or another.
What about witch burnings?
Well, first of all, most of them weren't really witches as we think of them today. That's maybe the.
And secondly, my understanding is most of them were extra legal proceedings.
And also they were usually being accused of something, and then on top of that were being accused of being a witch. It was usually husband murder, and also she's a witch.
Yeah, nowadays being a witch is proscriptive, but I think 200 years ago being a witch was descripted, meaning that with the worldview of the higher chain of being, something to that akin, on the bottom rung would be the devil, and if you have done a crime, you'll be in cahoots with the devil, and the worse the crime, the more in cahoots you are with the devil. And in this logic, if you're a woman, you're a witch because you're in cahoots with the devil. So yeah, I mean, if nowadays if you think of witch or something to that akin, my head goes immediately to Harry Potter. That's not what people thought in the Middle Ages, where you could actually get burned for witchcraft.
That's not what I think.
And what
apparently I'm older than you.
Well, I was not really into all this Harry Potter stuff.
Do you think of like a neo-pagan Wicca kind of pseudo-spiritual movement? That's
No, I think long pointy hat and green nose and warts.
Oh, well, yeah, that's true as well.
The Wicked Witch of the East.
Yeah, there you go.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's one more that I want to put on in a moment that I think, to me, I've brought up previously, and it's one of the few that makes me double take. But so far, have there been any that have made you at least question the death penalty?
No.
What me really disturbs is that it looks to me that the points between the in the PowerPoint looks that they're not the same distance. That perturbs me. That's maybe only my screen.
Yeah, I know. There's some weird formatting issue that's come up.
Death penalty for Albion for screwing up his PowerPoint.
Yes, I apologize profusely. Call me a witch. I was in cahoots with Satan, and he messed up the lines.
Also, the paragraphs are not aligned like your subsections. One of them.
Yeah, I did that intentionally because I didn't. Otherwise, they're bullet pointed, and I didn't like that. It was to be more aesthetic.
It didn't happen in the next one, so.
Oh, good lord! I repent. I repent.
No, but coming back to your point, I see a lot of business opportunities from these points that we can basically, by privatizing it, we can make it more efficient and less painful at a lower cost. So
the two that do, getting back to the point, jump out at me as reasonable arguments is one. I don't trust the courts anymore, so everything I've seen in most of the high-profile cases nowadays have seemed politically driven and not necessarily accurately reflecting the facts of the case. So political prosecutions are something that frighten me. And secondly, the I guess corollary argument to that is the successful prosecution of the innocent. So
let me tie it all together in a little package for you. Going on what you just said, we live in a okay, let me restart that sentence. We find ourselves in a situation where the government will prosecute you for anything that is against the current order, if you want to say. So should we be trying to encourage the death penalty when it's going to be used against anyone that opposes it? And that is the group in which we find ourselves.
I take issue with your language selection.
Well, it's intentional.
The pervasive argument.
Oh, good. Well, do you know what? This PowerPoint was slapped together, so I apologize if there's issues. All right.
Remember when I talked to you about style guides?
I mean, I can see that it is definitely a pervasive argument because it is a perversion of what would be the legal argument. I can see it also as persuasive argument. It's
real time. This is a dictionary being edited all over again.
Persuasive.
Let's just let's
The most Persian argument is
there you go.
ape together.
You and Zoolander could open up a school.
I mean, it's like having a headache and not taking the aspirin, straight going for the shotgun. Okay.
But I have no argument against that. I find it very difficult to argue for any aggregation of additional powers to the state when we're literally watching in real time that state be subverted and used unashamedly for perverse and political prosecutions.
Yeah, but on the other hand, for example, Count Dankula got all this fame and attention and whatnot for posting a spicy meme and getting fined 800 pounds. Imagine if he would get shot for that. Maybe
imagine how much he could enjoy his wealth then. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you have a.
Yeah, well, this is kind of the point I was trying to make.
This seems to be for me the question: do we need martyrs in order to further our point of view? And I think that most of us kind of adhere to principles, so we don't want to have something we don't inflicted upon us or somebody else which we don't want to have inflicted upon ourselves. And what I see with other people, they say, well, it's okay as long as it doesn't happen to me. So you see this with cancel culture, that people are defending cancel culture until they get cancelled themselves, and suddenly it's bad. While you should have said, well, yeah, it's terrible anyway. You shouldn't have started this. So I don't think we should push for the death penalty because on principle, to show how bad it is, because in principle we're against doing stuff to other people we don't want to have other people doing to us. So if somebody else makes a spicy meme about us, so fine.
I would hover on the word push. So yes, we should indeed not push for the death penalty to be strengthened, because it would be used disproportionately on us. But I'm also not of the I'm not under the impression that any particular law or any change in law would be applied equally. So I mean that's a factor to this whole thing, is that any change in the legal system that is just adding or taking away one or two laws is probably not going to make a difference to the overall picture. Just because the law is so compromised anyway. Like, we're not dealing with a neutral system. I'm somewhat reminded though of there was a case in the UK where a guy left a pack of bacon on, like, I think he rubbed it on the door of a mosque or something, or left it on the doorstep of a mosque, and he was sent to prison for that. And then subsequently, he was killed in prison So to me, that is very much an example of the state basically de facto inflicting the death penalty on this guy for offending Muslims, because they're obviously very aware that it's a contentious issue, and they failed to take the proper precautions to make sure that he would be able to stay alive in prison.
This is an issue that we have whenever we're talking about the death penalty, because it's always used in relation to the US. And the gangs are no different to that. In the US, you have ethnic gangs, but they, depending on the area, some will be more prominent than others, but there's usually enough to sort of shield their own. Whereas in a lot of prisons in the UK, they are just breeding grounds for religion of peace extremists. And so, you're going to find an increase of people being murdered for that kind of thing.
And this is additionally partly why I have slightly more sympathy for the idea that you can save lives even if you're accepting a certain amount of, or save innocent lives if you're accepting a certain amount of innocent executions, because I'm quite attuned to this idea of somebody who gets out of prison after being, perhaps radicalized into the religion of peace, and then goes on to commit a terror act that kills a whole lot of innocents. That's definitely a headline I've seen far more times than I'm comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but on the other hand, the state did not spoke the word, so to speak, that he was that he should be sentenced to death. It's just a convenient way of getting rid of people in that sense. And on the story, I guess you have to first of all be aware of the story and I guess keep up with it. But if I don't know, I'm speculating because I really don't know, and I just thinking about it. What would be the reaction if you just force the hands of the government to say, yeah, you actually have to send this man to death because of these offenses? You understand what I'm saying, or?
Well, I understand what you're saying. The problem is the state can't be compelled to do much of anything.
That's true.
It'd be showing their hand, which why would they do that unless they're forced to?
Yeah, force them to show their hand.
Yeah, if they can de facto commit these acts without, whilst on the having a veneer of liberality, then why would they change that?
Will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?
Yes.
Didn't the Portuguese or Spaniards send the priest they didn't want to Africa? Something to that effect?
Well, a lot of people got sent to Australia for that.
No, I mean Africa, because of the tropical diseases, so they would die, and it would be more or less a death sentence because papacy couldn't be sentenced to death.
Well, there's a lot of situations where people are sentenced to particularly egregious places and situations as a tacit sentence of death. The Soviets were famous for that.
Makes me think of the what's the final film in the Dark Knight trilogy when they're saying, "Are you going to opt for execution or the walking across the exile across the frozen lake?"
Yeah, I think it's The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, The Dark Knight Rises counterintuitively.
Yes, yeah. Anyway, I think that sort of concludes everything I had. Do you think I've missed any of the arguments? I feel like I tackled most of what they usually come up with.
Well, the challenge for addressing any of these arguments is understanding of the framework and the preconditions under which they're being made. So jumping between legal arguments and moral arguments and religious arguments, etc., is not exactly a way to come up with a coherent argument one way or the other, because the arguments, when properly made, based upon premises and proceed therefrom logically. So I don't think we addressed most of the premises on which many of these arguments were made. Not that there's anything right in them, But
Well, I think most of the arguments can only be made coming from a liberal perspective. So yeah, it does come with a whole heap of pre-existing assumptions about human nature, and nature-nurture debate is, I think, something that is intrinsically aligned with where you stand on the death penalty and the idea of free will or determinism.
Well, it's also the kind of whether a person is born innocent and corrupted by society, or is
Noble savage idea.
basically kind of wicked, and society is really a harsh place where you basically have to play the game and hope you win. So it's that kind of view, like are you born innocent or are you born like broken? You have.
Are you born free but everywhere in chains? Oh.
Well, on the other hand, I would argue it's a good way to introduce or remove a disciplinary mechanism from the state, which you maybe could rein in the terror of crime. But
I mean, yeah, it depends how you model the state as well. That's something that we've touched on a little bit, and I don't think there's as much consensus here on, well, I should say, in this virtual room as there is on some of those other issues. But yeah, all these different presuppositions that go into this conversation. But I mean, as with most issues, we could just get down to the root of it then and talk about epistemology on basically every issue, but it doesn't make for a very good conversation.
Yes, and I mean, with this in particular, I think it is very much just a case of a circle of people agreeing, and I think that you're not really going to convert many people, because I do think a lot of it is also an emotional response. And I think to an extent, if you are emotionally inclined to be against the death penalty, you're not unless your temperament changes, you're not going to change your opinion.
yeah, in a certain way, it's also a personality trait to be for or against it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, it's also that we're maybe not used to with dealing with terrible things, and the death penalty by design is a terrible thing.
Mm-hmm.
We like to have comfort in our lives, and so you could say, well, if we're all comfortable, then we don't need something like the death penalty, because it's quite severe. But if you are in a less comfortable situation, then you might actually come to the conclusion that you kind of need it, because there's nothing else to deter people. So,
or if you're transcending the situation, you could say that we are comfortable because we have that uncomfortable situation.
Mm-hmm.
There is one other argument that hasn't really come up so much here, but one that I'm sort of sympathetic to, in that if certain predispositions, which are perhaps heritable, are leading towards crime, so perhaps a propensity towards violence, obviously that's no good in civil society. You can't just have that around people who are very impetuous and violent, because they're likely to get into a lot of fights or likely to murder somebody in the heat of the moment or whatever else. But that's not something you necessarily want to lose to society. You still want to have that going forward into the future, especially if there's a genetic component to it. So what do you do with those people who you still need on sort of standby in case you need violent people at some point in the future, but you can't just have them sort of wandering around in the civil populace?
Yeah, I think this links into my question I had before. What you do with people? Okay, you went a little bit more with the deterministic route, but the question I ask about what you do with people that oppose your society, and I guess you could throw violent people in there, or people that have a tendency to be more violent than the rest.
Yes, or you could zoom out slightly further to say, you've got one type of people who are domesticated, let's say, and you've got another type of people who refuse to be, and obviously you can't have those people who refuse to be domesticated and are violent and refuse to abide by the rules. You can't just have them in civil society. So what do you do with them?
Yeah, I guess would have warrior cause that you send off to kill other people.
Yeah, so my answer to this would be something like penal units in armies, penal battalions or something like that.
Yeah, or
The problem with that is ask everyone else that's stationed there. Are they going to want to work with people like that?
Well,
if they find out what the crime is, they're not going to take kindly to certain people being part of their.
Yeah, of course. I mean, still, I think I don't misrepresent Rupert here, but certain people need sorting out, or if they really oppose society from ground up to top, I think the society has a responsibility to get rid of them. But talking about people that are predisposed to be violent, how you deal with them, and I guess if you get them into boxing or something, or fighting against another tribe for your tribe is making them a part for your society, so you could use them to defend against other tribes. But
this is exactly the ideal, is that if you could take that skill set that somebody has, or that predisposition, and then channel it to something that's useful for the tribe.
Well, this is exactly something that was just discussed on Ben Shapiro's Sunday show, where he was talking to Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson mentioned something about naturally aggressive children and how they needed to be socialized and corrected by the time they were 4, or they were basically hopeless. And he, in his clinical practice, worked with a lot of parents who had children of this nature, and he managed to give them a bunch of coping strategies and conflict resolution strategies that allowed them to properly socialize and basically retain but minimize or compartmentalize the natural aggression they possessed. So as a consequence of that, they were able to be integrated into society successfully. So the solution to this is address it during child rearing, when they're between 2 and 4 years old.
Well, this is still trying to just squeeze everybody into the same kind of mold, but sometimes you need those aggressive people.
They possess the aggression. The aggression is there. It's just channeled.
The way you describe it, that you have people who do not fit a mold, is something akin to having this industrial byproduct for which you need to find a market. And the problem is that we don't do wars at that level anymore, where you just had a penal legion. So there's no market for that byproduct. So the only place you can then do is dump it somewhere, which is put people in prison or shoot it to Venus or whatever. So that's a bit of a problem of this modern polite society, quote unquote polite society we have nowadays, where we don't have any place for people with those tendencies. While they might have a usable skill set if we had an organized society differently.
Well, I would disagree. I would say they have a place in society, just they're working against a society, meaning, for example, gangs. In gangs, those people will maybe even be reared, but they will come up, be violent, do their thing against another tribe, for example, Blood and the Crips. But they will fight in behalf of the tribe against another tribe. The problem is they live in a wider society that they hurt as well.
Yeah, that's more or less my point. That wider society does not have a place for them. So, given the supply of violent people, there will be they will create a situation where they can actually thrive, which is being in a gang.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds coarse putting it in this kind of language, but at some stage you just have to deal with the fact that this is the reality of it. That conflict or wars abroad is a sort of bloodletting for these types of people in a society. It's a way of disposing of them without doing it internally. And so when you don't have that, as you say, you just kind of have to dispose of them another way. And in this case, it's putting them in cells.
So
well, I mean, there is another.
And so people in the end, we all become eugenicists.
Well, unless you can get them to express it in another way, as Rupert is saying.
Well, no, that's being eugenicist.
Which is preferable.
Being eugenicist is the wrong way of looking at this potentially, because I mean it's a very common example, obviously, but the late Roman Empire, they obviously did their eugenics very well for their domestic Roman population, but then when Alaric showed up and all of the subsequent hordes, suddenly they had hundreds of thousands of men who couldn't defend against comparably a handful, because they'd been so domesticated.
Neutered, I guess.
Yeah.
Is the right word.
Weak men make hard times.
Well, yes, exactly. But I would suggest that perhaps part of our mental sort of framework for this issue is causing us to not have an answer to this, because we still have geopolitical rivals, and just because we're not fighting out in the open doesn't mean that we can't
send over suicide squads.
Well,
let's start a war to just to hash it out.
well, no, not quite that. But I wouldn't be at all surprised, for example, if somewhere like Turkey was trying to get rid of their most violent elements by sending them all to Germany, for example, because there is precedent for this as a policy. I believe Castro did that. Emptied out all the prisons and sent them to America.
And for some reason, America let them in.
Right.
And then look at what they did.
So there are still ways in peacetime.
Look at what those political prisoners actually managed to accomplish in America. In a lot of cases, America reformed them.
And in a lot of other cases, they didn't.
Well, in those cases, they tended to get chewed up, spit out, and sent back feet first.
I don't know. I feel like the vetting process could have been a hell of a lot better than it was.
It can always be a hell of a lot better.
Anyway, any other points? Should we wrap this up? It's been a good chat. But I feel like we've sort of made all the points we can.
I don't think you should center a line text if it's in a bullet point.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you, Bishop, is you're going to provide a style guide.
No. I'm just going to join the Irish. That's what I'm going to do.
How'd you like that?
Go. That's spot on there.
Yeah, great.
Can you make it blink?
That's Northern Irish, right? With the orange.
Let's see if I can add this in. There we are. How'd you like those? Yeah. Let's leave before I go off the rails on this.
Too late.
Good conversation. We will probably put a pin in the death penalty now. We may be back again. iTunes had some more info, but I mean, we've covered a lot of what we can cover now. So I think we'll draw an end to this conversation in a couple of weeks' time. For the book, we're going to be covering Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and for the next discussion, essay discussion, anyone remember off the top of their head? Let me have a look.
Are we doing the Iron Heel?
We are going to be doing an article by Trotsky.
So
yes, we will be doing the Iron Heel.
So something a little bit less communistic.
More commie fan fiction.
If America should go communist, so it is essentially the premise of the Iron Heel. No, but I think it'll be an interesting one.
Wait, is that actually what it's called? If America should go communist. Oh,
yep.
So we're reading Trotsky's fan fiction.
Yeah. Well, we say fan fiction. I think it's probably a little bit more realistic than the Iron Heel is.
It's probably just hindsight. When did he write it? Never mind. We'll see.
We'll look then.
More. Okay.
All right. Wrap it up. Any final thoughts, or should we just get out of here?
Bye.
Goodbye, all.
Goodbye.
Have a good night.